Let's just be real for a second. Spiritual growth is a grueling crucible. It literally tests our absolute limits of endurance. But what exactly happens when our deep desire to build long-term character violently collides with the psychological traps of the hedonic treadmill? If you haven't heard of it, this treadmill is basically an endless, exhausting loop of chasing immediate comfort. And as we're going to see in this explainer, it is the ultimate enemy of genuine spiritual grit.
Okay, before we systematically tear down the barriers that absolutely destroy our endurance, we need to clearly establish our baseline virtue. What are we actually talking about here? Well, perseverance is defined precisely as steadfastness, patience, and staying the course under long-term pressure or delay. Right? It's not just about surviving a tough Tuesday. It is about holding your ground when literally everything inside you is screaming to escape the pressure cooker.
Okay, let's dive right into this structural roadmap. We're looking at 3 distinct internal ambushes that threaten our perseverance: escaping through the flesh, the illusion of the eyes, and the pride of life. And finally, we're going to wrap up with the ultimate question: will you stand firm?
All right, part 1, escaping through the flesh. We're talking about dopamine and discomfort avoidance. This all hinges on our desperate, built-in need for physical and emotional comfort the split second we find ourselves under pressure.
There's this incredibly ancient wisdom from the book of Proverbs that says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Think about that. A city with broken walls is completely 100% defenseless. And you know what? It's the exact same with us. When a trial or a really long season of waiting stretches past our normal comfort zone, we panic. And that internal panic demands a rapid chemical or emotional escape route. It's crazy, but your capacity to endure gets completely short-circuited by this addictive craving for immediate emotional relief.
This brilliantly illustrates the core tension we're dealing with here. On one side, you've got the dopamine hijack. This is chasing that instant escape, scrolling for a quick distraction, or just finding a comforting compromise that acts like a temporary band-aid over your anxiety. But on the exact opposite side is the slow, highly disciplined work of endurance. The hard truth is, chasing that instant gratification systematically breaks down your spiritual defenses, mainly because you simply cannot tolerate the raw friction of a delayed response.
So here is a really convicting question to ask yourself. When the pressure really mounts and God requires you to just wait, do you sabotage your own endurance by breaking under the anxiety and chasing an instant escape? Or are you actually willing to stand guard over your heart and patiently outlast the pressure?
Now, check out this ancient text from Luke, because it brilliantly exposes our obsession with emotional comfort. It describes seeds thrown on rocky ground that sprout up super quickly, right? But they have absolutely no root. What it's suggesting is that we often only maintain our spiritual disciplines when our environment is warm, supportive, and, well, totally comfortable. But the second things get actually tough, our faith is exposed as this fair-weather pursuit with zero deep roots.
So here is the real challenge for us. The exact moment the climate changes and suddenly demands cold, unfeeling grit, do you just stall out? When that initial emotional excitement fades away, do you wither and collapse because your roots were buried entirely in comfort? Or do you actually possess the hidden stamina to dig deep and keep going right through that bone-dry ground?
Let's frame this next thought from Hebrews around the whole idea of avoiding discomfort. The text essentially challenges the reader by pointing out, hey, you haven't actually resisted to the extreme limit of shedding your blood. Yet we so often treat the mere presence of intense emotional friction, or even just being physically tired, as a totally valid permission slip to quit the race entirely. We literally allow our minds to tap out the exact second obedience hurts our feelings or drains our energy.
And this exposes a really critical flaw in how we think about endurance. Ask yourself, do you measure your capacity to endure against your own personal pain threshold? Because if you do, you're always going to coddle your weakness. You'll retreat into safety and basically remain a spiritual adolescent. Or do you fix your eyes on the ultimate sacrificial standard of Jesus and resist to the absolute limit?
Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds. This is the illusion of the eyes, perception versus reality. We're going to dive into how our own visual perception can actually completely betray our spiritual stamina.
Now, the book of Galatians specifically warns us not to become weary in doing good. And the massive trap here is that we wrongly evaluate the validity of our perseverance entirely by the immediate, visible results we can see right now. Like if our investment doesn't yield an instant, obvious return, we just assume it's a total waste of time, right?
It usually goes a bit like this. You start by doing good, but then you very quickly hit step 2, the optical illusion of barrenness.
Suddenly, your life looks static, and it feels completely empty of any progress. But here is the absolutely crucial point. Step 3. The subterranean, hidden growth. The stuff you literally cannot see. If you let that optical illusion of barrenness cloud your vision, you're going to abandon the field right before step 4, which is finally reaping the harvest.
So, we really need to pause here and ask, when your obedience yields absolutely no visible progress and it looks entirely barren to you, do you allow that optical disappointment to make you weary and quit? Are you actually abandoning God's hidden subterranean work just to go chase a cheaper, faster path that gives you an immediate sense of accomplishment? But this visual illusion isn't just about our own personal progress, it's also about the people around us. This passage from Matthew is fascinating because it unpacks the barrier of how things look to others. It says, the love of most will grow cold. Basically, when the cultural climate goes ice cold and public enthusiasm for doing the right thing just completely fades away, our commitment to stand firm tends to fade right along with it. We lose our stamina the absolute second there's no audience left to applaud us.
So consider this. When culture goes cold and there's absolutely zero public praise, does your internal fire just go out? When nobody is validation checking your sacrifices? This really challenges whether your endurance is actually rooted in deep conviction for the glory of God, or if it's honestly just a superficial, trendy routine you've been performing to keep up appearances.
All right, moving into part 3, the pride of life. We're looking at dignity, arrogance, and superiority. This section addresses our deeply ingrained prideful desires for personal control and status.
Now, what's really interesting here is how pride systematically escalates. It's like a chain reaction. It starts with dignity, just feeling the need to defend our social status. But then it metastasizes into arrogance, where we start deploying our own wits to take control of the situation. And finally, it results in superiority, judging everyone else. Let's break down exactly how these 3 traits completely destroy our perseverance.
The very first barrier here is dignity, and it's perfectly captured in this exchange from the ancient story of Job. Job has literally lost everything, and his wife essentially looks at him and asks why he's still maintaining his integrity instead of just giving up. See, we often carry this proud, unexamined assumption that people of our respectability should never have to endure long-term humiliation. So when trouble strips us of our status and makes us look pathetic, our immediate instinct is to defend our dignity by rebelling against God.
So here's a hard-hitting question for you. When a trial makes you look weak to your peers, do you find it deeply insulting? Do you protect your dignity through bitter rebellion? Look, treating your suffering as some sort of unjust violation completely forgets that a sovereign God reserves the right to manage your story. The call is actually to humbly accept both the good and the trouble. Next, we focus on that escalation to arrogance. Proverbs tells us that those who trust in themselves are fools. So how does this play out? Arrogance kicks in the moment we decide God is moving just a little too slowly for our liking. The pressure stretches us past our patience, and honestly, we become too proud to wait. So what do? We abandon patient endurance, and we arrogantly deploy our own wits, our own calculations, and our own autonomous escape routes to force a resolution.
It really all comes down to this. When faced with a long, agonizing delay, do you assume your immediate intellect is somehow superior to the sovereign pacing of a creator who is telling you to just sit still and trust? Do you arrogantly manufacture your own escape route? Or do you have the grit to walk in the wisdom of patient, submissive endurance?
Part 4, Will You Stand Firm? The Final Verdict. So the crucial point is that we've seen exactly how the cravings of the flesh, the optical illusions of our eyes, and the deep-seated pride of life are constantly trying to ambush our stamina. Bringing all these threads together, it all comes down to one final choice about how we handle the crucible.
Are you going to remain trapped on the hedonic treadmill, forever chasing immediate comfort and escaping the very friction that is designed to forge your character? Or will you embrace the crucible, outlast the pressure, and build true, lasting spiritual endurance? Take a deep audit of your own spiritual grit. The choice is entirely yours.